life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Very different perspective that he gives than the other gospel writers, the other people who write about Jesus' life. The part I read from Luke was Luke's idea of seeing, I guess, the way we see things, the way we see it from human perspective. There was a girl and a young guy, and they lived in a small town in Israel, and they were betrothed, meaning they were engaged, and she got pregnant, and nothing had gone on between them, and so they wondered how that was, and they had to take a long journey to a place and register, and then when they were there, this baby was born, and these angels announced it, and it was quite a massive experience. That's from our perspective. John writes from a very different perspective. He's actually like from heaven looking back to earth. He's in eternity looking back to time, and he says in the beginning, meaning like way in the very, very, very beginning, even the beginning before the beginning of the Bible, like in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Even before that, he says, in the beginning was the Word. And if you don't understand that, just think of Jesus in that place for Word. It has a lot more meaning. It has depth and breadth and richness for both Jews and Greeks and for us. But break it down, it's like Jesus. In the beginning was Jesus. And Jesus was with God. And Jesus was God, meaning God was in eternity, a Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and the Son, Jesus, was there before anything was created. And looking back, he says, and the Word, Jesus, became flesh, and he made his dwelling among us, and we have beheld his glory, the glory of the one and only. I mean, he is talking about Jesus from eternal perspectives. Now, John, who is writing this, is a Jewish guy, a young Jewish guy when he met Jesus for the first time. By now, he's writing and he's much older, and he sees things in such a big, large, vast understanding. And he brings to us a beautiful picture of the immensity, the enormity of Jesus coming to earth as God with us in the flesh. Now, as a Jewish guy, he would have known all these things. He had been hearing the stories of the Messiah, the promised one, the one who was to come, who would be anointed, and he would bring peace and prosperity to the people of Israel, and he would break them free from the oppression that they were experiencing. Now, looking back, John would have understood a whole lot of the stories that we read from the Bible, especially like the first one. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And you know that it was very dark and there was chaos and it was not a great place. And then all of a sudden, God spoke and light existed. Into the darkness, God spoke light. Then he created all kinds of things. But the first thing that he brought into the darkness was this light, this bright light. And my hope is that Jesus will be that kind of light for you. That if you're going through a dark time or there's a dark place in your life, that he will shine light into that and there will be a time of healing and hope. Now, John would have heard a lot of the other stories about God really speaking light into darkness or helping people when they're struggling. I think of Noah. You guys remember that story? The flood came and it wiped out everybody, except Noah and his family. His family was saved and they were on a boat and they went around for a number of days, and then eventually out of the boat came the family and all the animals, and they repopulated the earth. But a lot of people went through a lot of struggle during that time period, except them. They were saved through it. I think other stories from the Bible, like Abraham. Abraham is a guy from the Old Testament, right in the book of Genesis, where he was worshiping like idols and pagan gods, and then all of a sudden God spoke to him and said, "Hey, Abraham, would you like to follow me? Would you like to go to a new place? And you can worship me and serve me because I'm the one true God." And he goes, "Yeah, I think I'll do that." And then they start traveling. And it's interesting because Abraham and Sarah, his wife, they get really old. His wife is really old. I can say that because she's not my wife. And because I couldn't say that if it was my wife. My wife is young, way younger than me. Really younger than me. Sarah's really old and she hasn't had a baby yet. And so she's nearly 100, getting to the point where she's 100, and there's no thought that she's going to have a child. And yet God comes to Abraham and says, "Guess what? At this time next year, you're going to have a baby." And Sarah even laughed. She said, "Yeah, whatever, that's never going to happen." And sure enough, God comes and brings this child when they never thought a child could come. Now, the other thing that John would have heard is all of these prophecies about a Messiah coming, a Messiah who would come and free his people and bring peace to earth, and all these amazing things about this Messiah, this Christ. He would hear them from people called the prophets, and the prophets would usually speak during a time of great oppression in the Jewish people's lives. Oftentimes they would fail God and they would mess up, and so he would send them off into captivity, and they would be miserable, and then he would send a prophet and say, "Hey, listen, if you come back to me, you'll be blessed. I promise you, just follow me, and you'll be blessed. You'll come back." And in those prophecies, oftentimes the prophets would speak of a time in the coming future where a Messiah would come and all the people of the earth would be rescued, that all the people would see light instead of darkness, that they would find new life. And one of the prophets is Isaiah, and Isaiah speaks, I think, more about Jesus than any other prophet, because he's talking about what is to come for the Israelites, and not just the Israelites, for everyone on the face of the earth. And here, these are some of the passages that you hear about during this time of the year, about Christmas. "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." Of course, this is written 700 years before Jesus even shows up. And he's speaking about a young woman who will never be with a man and yet will have a son. And you'll call him Emmanuel, and the word Emmanuel means God with us. That Jesus is that person who came from a virgin girl and was born so that God could come and be with us. He would not leave us alone. There are other passages in the Old Testament, especially in this book of Isaiah. Maybe you've heard this before. "To us a child is born, to us a son is given." And you got to believe that, they're talking about Jesus like right at the time when Jesus was being born, right? No. Actually, he wrote 700 years before any of this happened. And then one obscure passage. It's a bit obscure, but certainly speaks about Jesus. And I'll tell you why in a second. This is the passage. It's from Isaiah 11. "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his root shall bear fruit. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord." Now, once again, he's speaking about this coming Messiah. Now, where was Mary and Joseph from? Does anybody remember that part of the story? They were from Nazareth. Nazareth. You know what the town Nazareth means? Well, it actually means a shoot. A shoot. Like, think of a stump. Have you ever read this book called The Giving Tree? I guess when my kids were little, we had to read it. And I don't remember it that well. I read it a long time ago. And I think it's about this tree that grows up, and this little boy knows the tree. They kind of have a friendship. Strange part of the story, I guess. But I think the boy starts like whacking off the tree down. He's doing everything with the tree. I think he sells its apples and then sells its wood. And then by the end, this poor tree is down to a stump. Like it's nothing except a stump. And I think he sits on it. It's like, boy, that's great. Thanks a lot. What a great friend you are. You take everything and then you sit on me. So the idea of a stump. And I was thinking about how miserable he must have felt, that tree, being a stump. And that's kind of like, the whole tree just got taken away. It's a stump. Now, what he says is this out of the stump of Jesse. Jesse was David. Remember David and Goliath? He slew the big giant. Jesse was David's dad. And so it's really talking about the lineage of this Messiah, who Jesus is going to come from, the house and line of David in the New Testament, it says. And David and Jesse were related. And he says that the shoot is going to come out of this old stump. And I was thinking about how just life works sometimes. And sometimes, don't you feel just like a stump? Like life has just knocked you down so often that you just feel like a stump. a stool for somebody to sit on. But he says the shoot's going to come. Now, Nazareth, the word Nazareth means shoot. It's like Shootville, or I don't know. Shootville. They even thought that there was a possibility that the Messiah would come from this area because of this passage and the idea that the Messiah was going to come out of this dead thing and bring new life. It says that the shoot will come forth from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. I don't know if you ever read the New Testament where Jesus talks about the idea that God is like a vine and we're the branches, and if we stay connected to him, that we will bear much fruit. And this is the same idea. Jesus often looks back into the Old Testament to make a new teaching for those who are following him. And he says, if you can stay connected to God and understand the idea of the stump and the shoot, this new life that comes out of it, and from that is going to come the Messiah. If you stay down deep into the soil or the roots of God, your life will bear fruit. This is the idea of Jesus coming and bringing new life to those of us who thought that life was pretty much over. That because of the things that have happened to us and the struggles that we have, it's just kind of ended. And he says, no, I'm going to come and bring new life to all of you. And then he says this, the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him. So the idea is that when the Messiah would come, the Spirit of the Lord will come and empower him to live the kind of life, to honor God, and to do ministry or minister to people in God's name to bring them incredible life. These words, the spirit of wisdom and understanding. Now, I was thinking about those two words and thinking about what's gone on in the past year and my life and what's coming in the future. And I thought, wouldn't it be awesome? Because sometimes the future seems a little dark, a little scary. Wouldn't it be awesome to be able to tap into the wisdom of God, to know, to get guidance, to have him lead you into the future, his wisdom, and also understanding. I don't know if you've ever looked back in the past part of your life and just wondered, why? Why did that happen? Wouldn't it be awesome to be able, maybe not to reconcile it, but to at least say, God, if you brought me through that, my prayer is that you will use it to shape me, to mold me, to make me a better person, to make me a person who honors you more, who has more compassion for people, who shows more kind of love than I have before. The next phrase is the spirit of counsel and might. Counsel. I don't know if in the New Testament, the Holy Spirit is often talked about as the counselor or the comforter, the advocate, the one who comes alongside and walks us through kind of the darkest parts of our lives. I was thinking about this past year, and what was probably the darkest part of my life was when my dad passed away in July 13th. I was with him when he died. I was the only one in the room with him, and I thought, wasn't it great to be able to have the Spirit of God, the Comforter, there with me when I went through that? I haven't told this story too often. The day he died, I was in Home Depot, and the guy called who made our sign out in the front that lights up and says One Hope. And he called and he said, hey, you need to come over here and choose the color of green. And I went, yeah, can't you choose the color? Oh, okay, I'll come and choose it. I'll be right over. And so I was getting into my car and ready to leave, and I just sensed that I should go and see my dad at that moment. And he'd been in hospice care. He was not doing well, and so I knew it was going to be soon. And I just thought, I think I better go over and see my dad first. My mom was off at a doctor's appointment with my wife, and I knew he was alone. So I went to hospice and went into the room, and I thought, when he came to know Christ, he did it as a song, Shout to the Lord. If you're old in the faith, you know we are. Shout to the Lord. Yeah, great song. So I put it on my phone, and I turned it up really loud, and I set it by his ear, and I just kneeled by his bed, and I prayed for him. And just asking God to take him home. He had a stroke, and so he was paralyzed. He couldn't speak. It was not how he wanted to live. And so I just said, God, will you take him? And so we listened to that song a few times, and then I put it on one of my favorite songs, It Is Well, and we listened to that, and during the second time that we went through it, he stopped breathing. And so I was praying for him, worshiping when he left the earth and saw the face of Jesus. And I thought, okay, I don't like that he's gone, but boy, that's a perfect way to go. I want that. And I thought about the idea that, oh, I'm so glad I didn't go off to the sign guy. Instead, I went to see my dad because I would have missed that. And that was probably the most precious moment that I've ever had with my dad. And I know that when I'm going to leave here and we're going to go have lasagna at my house, and this is going to be the first Christmas Eve without my dad, and he would always comment on the lasagna and the bread and the salad and the dessert, and he would groan or moan when he was eating. That's good, Dana. So I know I have to do that now so that we remember him, but it's going to be tough. It also says he has the spirit of might, the idea of strength. I know that maybe some of you have gone through difficult times similar to that, and right now you just feel weak. There's maybe somebody who you wish was here, a relationship that has gone bad, something that you would just, God, I need your strength, I need your might to get through this. Then he says the spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord, knowledge, just knowing things that could happen to you and being prepared for it. In a moment, I'm going to show you a video, and sat down with somebody, and in talking to them, it was amazing the things that she said that people had spoke into her life, and she knew they were from the Lord, gave her encouragement, gave her knowledge, and things that she would not have known otherwise, and it was such a blessing to her. And then the idea of the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord isn't about scared or being frightened. It's really about having an awe, knowing the majesty and glory of God and just being in awe of it. Even kneeling down. The story, of course, and if you've heard from the Gospel of Linus, the shepherds were sore afraid. And when the angels appeared before the shepherds, they dove for the ground. It was scary. And they said, oh, no, fear not. I'm going to bring you some good news. They're into this darkness. There's going to be this new light. Jesus is going to come. The Savior has been born for you. And they went from worshiping the angels, these incredible angelic beings, and they went to a manger. And they kneeled down and worshiped a little baby, a baby that they knew was God, a baby that had come into the earth to bring incredible light. This is the last passage from Isaiah. It says, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. Could you imagine if you were walking through a dark time and you were desperate for light? See, Jesus is that light. Sat down with a young lady who came to the church on our opening day this week, and heard about her story, the struggle that she and her husband have had to become pregnant. And we watch a little bit of that interview.
When I was a little girl, I remember always playing with Barbie dolls and baby dolls, always being that caretaker. I'm 10 years older than my youngest brother, so when he was born, he got pushed around in my baby doll stroller all the time. I remember waking up in the middle of the night with him willingly to give him his bottle at 10. I had these baby dolls that I would take that were twins, and they would giggle when they were together and they would cry when they were apart, and I just loved them and I took them everywhere. I always wanted to be that mom. I was the star babysitter on our street. I had every house on the street that had young kids. I was the one on call. I was the first choice. So the other moms on the street would always joke that I owned the street. And they would call me and they would arrange amongst each other, okay, who gets Lisa this night? We need her this weekend. So my husband Kevin and I were married on October 4th of 2008. And I was ready to start a family right away. He, on the other hand, was like, let's slow down a second. Let's enjoy this portion of our lives. He now jokes that if he had known it would take so long, he would have been on board a little bit sooner. But we started trying for a family probably 6 months after our wedding. So eventually a coworker of mine had talked about, he and his wife had gone to a fertility study up at Wayne State University. And so I looked into it and I thought, this is maybe something that could help us. So we participated in the study. And so after it was probably 3 years into our marriage was when we got our first positive pregnancy test. And we were so excited. We were thrilled. Couldn't wait to call our parents. I think we called our parents at like 11 o'clock that night. And couldn't keep the secret. We wound up at Wayne State having an ultrasound, and everything looked okay, but they were still unsure as to how far along we really were. So they had us come back another week and did another ultrasound. And they didn't say anything looked wrong, but they didn't say everything looked perfect. But they released us to our OB-GYN here in Toledo. So we set up appointments. Everything seemed to be going okay. I thought pregnancy was a dream. I had no morning sickness. I had nothing. And we went for an ultrasound to date our pregnancy at that point with our OB here in Toledo, and that was when the ultrasound tech told us she couldn't find a heartbeat. Our hopes were shattered though when we called Wayne State again to see if we could participate in the study, and they told us, well, technically you got pregnant, so we got all the information we needed. Unfortunately, we cannot have you participate any further. So our hopes were crushed. I think we took, at that point, about 6 months to a year before we started trying again. So in that time frame, I went to a really dark spot. Lots of depression, not wanting to really get up and be social with anyone. Having a hard time with pregnancy announcements with friends. I remember when my best friend called me and told me that they got pregnant, and they weren't trying, but they weren't not trying. And I was so happy for her. I really, really was. But the moment I hung up the phone, I called my mom and I just bawled for an hour. I mean, uncontrollable sobbing, just heartbroken that why them and not us?
I don't know if you've ever been in that spot before where you were heartbroken because the thing that you had hoped so much for all of a sudden had just been cut off. I first met Lisa. I remember she walked into the doors here early on in the church. I don't know if you know this, we're only about a year old as a church, and so she early, in this year, she walked in there, and as a new person, and I'm kind of in charge of meeting with new people, and so I took her out to coffee just to kind of get to know her a little bit. And one of the first things that I noticed as she kind of related a little bit of that story to me, even in that first meeting, the thing that I noticed was that she has a hope that I can only characterize as like a militant hope. It's a hope that fights off the darkness. It's a hope that just keeps pushing her forward. And I remember thinking, like, I'm a pastor, I know the Bible, I feel like I'm supposed to know hope better than she does, but she just knows it in a way that I don't think anybody else that I've experienced knows it. And I've been thinking about the concept of hope and light and dark, and I've been thinking about, like, how is it that we get this hope? Like, how is it that we get this militant hope, a hope that fights off the darkness? I think, first of all, you have to know what hope is. Have you ever seen these three words put together, faith, hope, and love? Sometimes you see this on like an inspirational poster, and it's right next to the other poster with everybody who's skydiving, and on the bottom it says teamwork, and you're like, I'm inspired. Teamwork. I'm going to go talk to my coworker today. Nobody's inspired by those posters, by the way. Anyway, so maybe you've seen it on a poster, or maybe you've seen it on a coffee mug, or like on a T-shirt. Faith, hope, and love. have you ever wondered, like, why those three? Why do those three, like, why are they always stuck together? Well, it turns out that these three were written about by Paul a lot, and he's the one who kind of sandwiches them together. And the early church was like a little bit like, Paul, what's going on here? Like, you got like these three things that you keep putting together. Like, what's that about? And so they got together to kind of debate and discuss, and kind of what they came up with is this idea that I think is really beautiful, that these three are completely inseparable, that these three are intimately linked to each other, that each one contains the other two. Or to put this in a different way, when you have two of those, they equal the other one. There are pieces of the equation of one. So let me just kind of walk you through how this works. Let's put a faith up there. Love plus hope equals faith. The ingredients to faith is love and hope. And we actually see this in James. James talks about how the demons, even the demons, they know that Jesus is the Son of God. They know that God is ruling on high over creation. They know these things, but their faith doesn't amount to anything. Why? Because they don't love him. Because their hope is not in him. In fact, they're against him. And so we see that faith, true faith, saving faith, is love and hope. Similarly, love is hope and faith. We see this in 1 Corinthians 13. It's the love chapter. Paul says a bunch of beautiful things about what love is, but nestled in the middle of it, he says these two phrases, that love believes all things, that's faith, and that love hopes all things. And so maybe you can see that love is many things. A lot could be said about love, but at least it is faith and hope. Similarly, hope is contained, or it's the ingredients to hope are faith and love. If you think about this, we don't hope in something unless we have a little bit of faith that it's going to work out, right? Like, how many of you in this room have proposed to somebody, right? Like, yeah, okay, good job. This is a little bit participatory, like hey, guys. If you propose to somebody, you know this, that you would not get down on one knee unless you had even just a little thought that she was going to say yes. Because if she says no, there's no recovering from that, Like, you might as well just, go home and eat ice cream all day. That happened anyway, at some point. I'm sure somebody's done that. We don't hope for things unless we have a little bit of faith that it's going to work out. Similarly, we don't hope for things unless the result that we're hoping for contains a little bit of something that we love. Nobody gets on one knee to propose because they hate the girl. They propose because they love her, because there's love. Love energizes and drives our hope. It's what gives our hope life. Similarly, nobody gets into a career or a profession unless there wasn't something in it that they loved. Maybe it was the income that you were searching for, or maybe it was the freedom that job allowed. You loved having that freedom, or maybe it's just like what you do. Maybe you're a nurse, or you just love what you do, or a teacher. You just love what you do. You don't hope to get into a profession. You don't hope to do anything unless there's a little bit of love in there. Similarly, I don't know if, actually, I think that the quickest way that we can lose hope in something is when we lose faith. I think the quickest way that we can lose hope in a relationship is when the person that we were in love with, when it turns out that they aren't who we believed they are. Have you ever had that moment? Or maybe we lose hope in a job when it turns out that it doesn't fulfill us in the way that we believed that it would. Sometimes when we have something that we believe in and then that kind of just lets us down, that is one of the quickest ways that we lose hope. Similarly, if we don't have love, if you close yourself off to love, you've essentially removed yourself from the capacity to hope. I don't know if you know this person. Maybe you have this person in your life who is, who like, because of a rejection or a hurt at some point in their lives, they've closed themselves off. And they become really grumpy and really angry and bitter, and they kind of lash out at people. I was a physical therapist assistant before I was a pastor. I worked in a nursing home, and you just see this, especially at the end of life, people who have been hurt so much, they're closed. They're closed off to love, and they can neither receive it from anybody else, nor can they give it. And there's just If you know this person, you know that it's just such a hopeless, bleak, despairing life. If you don't have love, you cannot have hope. It's an essential ingredient. And I think knowing the ingredients to hope kind of helps you to have that militant hope, because you know if I'm hopeless or if I'm losing hope, which one of the ingredients am I missing? And so you can just kind of question, have I lost faith in this decision that I'm making? Have I lost faith in this path that I think that I was going to go down? Have I lost faith in this person that I was in love with? Have I lost faith in this job that I have chosen for my life? Have I lost faith in the religion that I've picked? Sometimes I think that we lose faith in our religions when we believe that they explain the world in a way that we just thought was good, and then all of a sudden something happens, and all of a sudden we just feel so let down, and you can lose faith. But the problem is that when we lose faith, it cuts us off from hope. And so I know this is a little bit hallmarky. I know it's a little bit cheesy, but is this Christmas, is tomorrow, the day that you come back? The day that you restore your faith in humanity? The day that you restore your faith maybe in God? Similarly, I think when we lose love, we're gonna be cut off from hope. And so is this Christmas the Christmas that you decide to love people again? To maybe call the person that you haven't talked to in years just to wish them a Merry Christmas? Is it the Christmas that you decide to be with family and receive their love even though that they've hurt you in the past? Maybe this Christmas is the day that you open yourself to love, and I think that when you open yourself to love and faith, you'll begin to have this militant hope that I think Lisa has. And I think sometimes, it's easy to know things, It's another thing to do them. It's easy to know the ingredients to hope. It's another thing entirely to have a hope that fights off the darkness. And so sometimes I think in order to bridge the gap between head and heart, often what is needed is a rich experience. And so I think that if we're struggling still, I think what we need to do is we need to hear the message that creation is preaching. Let me explain that. Have you ever wondered why we celebrate Christmas on Christmas? Like why is it that we celebrate Jesus' birth on December 25th every year? It seems to me like this weird thing, because light, if you think about it, it's such a depressing day. I know I'm kind of being a little Scrooge here, but here's the thing. Ever since June 21st, that was the longest day, light has been shrinking. Did you know that? The days have been getting shorter. Darkness has been growing. We have this thing in the fall where the leaves turn colors and they're so pretty, but it means that they're dying. They eventually turn brown and they fall off. We have this thing called snow, and let's be honest, it's good once, right? We're all happy with it's good once, and then after that, it's like, okay, just go away. Because here's the thing, the snow, what it does is it comes and it just completely covers the grass. And I always notice this every year, that the grass is the last thing that has color in the world. And then all of a sudden, snow covers it, and everything is white, gray, brown, or black, and it's just colorless. I think, whether you've had a loss or whether whether you've never had a loss, it's just kind of a depressing time of year, I think what we need to do is recognize that maybe we might be feeling hopeless this Christmas. And I think to rectify that, we need to hear the message that creation is actually preaching. So the reason that we celebrate Christmas on Christmas is because of this. For the first 400 or 500 years of Christianity explodes. Where there's missions sent into India, deep into Africa, up into France, and Christianity has grown from these 12 Middle Eastern dudes to like thousands of people. It becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. And as it's expanding northward into Europe, missionaries encounter this people group that we refer to as the Celts. Now, so they decided that they wanted to send missionaries to them, that they wanted to preach the gospel to convert the Celts. And what happened was the Celts had a very nature-based, creation-based religion. And everything to them had to be tied to the earth and to the seasons and to the sun and to the moon, very common in what we would call pagan or heathen religions. And what happened was these missionaries would go to the Celts and they'd say, you guys are really screwing up here. I can't believe that you believe in like the sun and the moon. Like those aren't gods. There's another God and you're stupid for not believing in him. So did that work, do you think? No. In fact, they got killed. So anyway, so then these missionaries, they kind of regrouped the ones that lived, and they're like, this isn't working. We need to come up with a different strategy. And so what they decided to do was to study the culture and to see what they think and to kind of see if there was an in somewhere within their culture. So they asked them this: what do you celebrate? Like, what do you think is good? And the Celts would say, well, we have our biggest holiday, our highest feast day, is the winter solstice. And what the Celts believed was that that light had been growing less and less, the darkness had been growing more and more, the days had been getting shorter, the nights had been getting longer, and so what they believed was that the sun itself was dying. And that every winter solstice, it needed to be reborn. And what they would do is they had this elaborate ceremony that they would do in order to make the sun be reborn. They thought it was dependent on them. And if they didn't do it perfectly, then the sun would not be reborn and they would all die. And so they said that every winter solstice, they have this elaborate ceremony, and then they celebrate the sun being reborn, light beginning to grow again. Because I don't know if you know this, after December 21st, the days get longer and longer. They actually start to grow again. And so for them, this was like their highest holiday. This was their feast, the biggest feast day. And the missionaries listened to this, and they said, we know that story. And they took them to John chapter 1, which Steve kind of read earlier. And I want to read this to you. It says, in the beginning was the Word. That word, in Greek, it's logos. It means power. Steve said it refers to Jesus, and it 100% does. If you have a Bible, you'll notice that it's capitalized, because what John is saying is that Jesus is power. And he says, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and this is the key. All things were made through him, and without him, not anything that was made has been made. They said, I know that you think that the sun is this power and it needs to be reborn, but let me tell you about a power behind that power. Let me tell you about the one who created that sun. Let me tell you about the power through whom the entire world was made. It continues, he said, in him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines into the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. They said, you believe that the son needs to be reborn? Let me tell you about another son who was born. And because of his birth, light remains forever. It doesn't matter that if you don't live up to the standard. It doesn't matter if you don't do this ceremony perfectly. That light will never die. And they said, nature itself has been preaching this message to you, and you just missed it by a little bit. Your perspective was off a little bit. And I think, like, in the future now, we can look back on the Celts and we can think, like, those idiots, like, clearly the sun and the moon, like, I have zero effect on them. Like, my ceremony, whatever I do is not going to make the sun be reborn. But I think sometimes our perspective is off a little bit too. In Christmas, we celebrate giving stuff away instead of hoarding it. We celebrate giving the things that we have made in creation, whether it's video games or books. Those are all made of the stuff of the earth. We celebrate giving them away instead of worshiping it and hoarding it. Sometimes our perspective can be the exact same as the Celts, worshiping the sun, worshiping the moon, worshiping stuff instead of the Creator. But I think that there's a deeper similarity. Sometimes our perspective can be off because we spent so long in the hopeless night that we don't know what light looks like anymore. Sometimes we can believe what the darkness has been preaching to us, that the darkness is endless, that light is never coming, that whatever situation is going on in our lives, even though we knew, in Lisa's case, that she was meant to be a mom, it was put in her spirit from the time that she was young, she just knew. But in this darkness in which her hope was not fulfilled, it is so tempting for us to believe that that's all there is, that darkness has the final word. But what the missionary said is that you just needed a perspective shift. You just needed to see that light was again going to grow. And it wasn't because of anything that you had done. And it wasn't because the darkness was necessarily even defeated. It was just because of the power of the Son, S-O-N, being born into creation. Our church is called One Hope. And in Ephesians 4, Paul says that he is our one hope. And so we've named our church One Hope after Jesus. And it's in Christmas that we celebrate that the one hope stepped into creation, that he put on flesh, that in him was life, and that life was the light of men. And so we know that the darkness is fading and that light is again growing. And sometimes I think that kind of bridging this gap between knowing that we have hope this season and really actually having hope this season, you need to hear the message that creation is preaching. See, creation itself, the days are getting longer. Creation itself is crying out to us a message, and that is that light overcomes darkness, that the light shines into it and the darkness has not overcome it. And so I hope on Christmas morning, tomorrow morning, that you wake up, I hope you go downstairs and I hope that you're enjoying your kids, but I also hope that you look out the window and you see the light, and you know that the days are getting longer, that you hear the message that creation is preaching, that Jesus stepped into the world, and because of that, the light overcomes the darkness. And I think if we do that, if we hear that message, if we can have faith and love that leads to a hope, I think we'll have a militant hope, just like Lisa. I want to show you the conclusion of that interview.
There was a Sunday where Josh had asked us to choose a word to define ourselves. What was our old definition and what was our new? And the two words that came to me were fruitless to fruitful. And I felt like God was just confirming at that point that this was my year. That this was the year that after 9 years of struggling with infertility, that this was the year. And that this was the year that I was going to feel like I was fruitful. And I remember standing at the door as a greeter with Katie Dolger, and I told her I had this weird vision that Steve and Josh were praying over me and I was pregnant. And she was like, oh my gosh, that's gonna be so cool if it comes true. But it was probably 2 months later and Kevin and I were pregnant. So it was really cool the way God just kept reaffirming me once I was on the right path.
There's a proverb that says when you don't get your hope, it's like what you hope for. He says it's sickness to the heart. But when desire is fulfilled, it's a tree of life. I wonder if this Christmas that we'll put our hope in God, maybe for the first time, that we'll see that because of him, light is growing in our lives and that hope is again possible. So may you abound in faith and in love. May that lead to a militant hope. And may you hear the message that creation is preaching, that light is growing again, that darkness has been overcome.